For the next few chapters, we'll examine different market structures, or models about how firms in a market interact with buyers to sell their output. So there are several different market structures based on the type of goods that are being sold and the competitiveness or the number of firms in the industry. So the market structures that we are going to examine over the next 4 chapters are listed below in a decreasing order of competitiveness. So first, there's perfectly competitive markets, which, as the name implies, is perfect competition. Next is monopolistically competitive markets, where there's a little bit less competition. Next is oligopolies, where there is significantly less competition. And then finally, monopolies, where there's only one firm, so there's no competition. Each market structure will be applicable to different real-world markets and will give us insight into how firms in certain types of industries behave and how they make their decisions. Now, the first market that we're going to examine is a perfectly competitive market. Rarely, if ever, does a perfectly competitive market exist in the real world. But the model is a basis for several other theories, and it's very important to learn this to understand because it still does help us understand how firms operate, how they make their decisions, even if it doesn't perfectly hold in the real world. So there are 3 characteristics or 3 assumptions of the perfectly competitive market. The first is that there are many buyers and sellers. So there's a lot of people selling the goods and a lot of people buying the goods. So there's a lot of competition going. Next is that all firms sell identical products. So if you go to one seller, they're selling the same thing as the other seller. So again, it helps there be vigorous competition between them because there aren't differences between each firm. And the final assumption is that there are no barriers to new firms entering the market. There's no enormous costs, there's no regulation, there's no secret knowledge that are preventing new firms from entering the market and beginning to compete. So the first and the second conditions that I mentioned imply that perfectly competitive firms are price takers. And by price takers, I mean that they're unable to affect the market price. This is because they're tiny relative to the market and they sell exactly the same product as everyone else. So if they would try to increase their prices above their competitors, people would just go and shop at their competitors instead. By definition, a firm in a perfectly competitive market is too small to affect the price. So every single seller is a price taker. They are forced to sell at the market price. No matter how many units that firm sells, they have to sell at the market price. So if we look at their demand curve, it is an unusual slope than what we dealt with in the past. In fact, it's flat, it's horizontal. So here we have a graph of the demand for, let's say, agricultural markets, like the market for wheat, which is pretty much close to perfectly competitive. So this farmer in the figure on the right has a horizontal demand curve. Whether this farmer sells at 6,000 bushels of wheat or 15,000 bushels of wheat per year, they're going to receive the same price for the bushel because this farmer is too small to affect the market price because they're so small compared to the overall size of the market. While the demand curve for the individual farmer in the perfectly competitive market is horizontal, the demand curve for the overall market demand and the market supply curve as well are going to be upward and downward sloping, like we've worked with before. So if we look at the figure above, this shows the market demand for wheat overall and then the demand for the individual farmer's wheat. So there are thousands of individual wheat farmers that are all contributing wheat to the wheat market. So their collective supply is going to be upward sloping, and the collective demand for all the wheat is going to be downward sloping, just like we've seen before. So now where the market supply and the market demand curve cross, that's going to be our equilibrium point. So in this example, it's going to be $7 will be the equilibrium price. And 2.25 billion bushels of wheat are going to be sold per year. So now for our individual farmer, that equilibrium price is going to be the price that they take. So the demand curve is going to be horizontal at $7, the equilibrium price. So you can just trace the $7 over from the market supply and demand to the individual farmer's demand curve, and then it's horizontal at that price. So now the farmer can choose to produce at any quantity they want on the demand curve. Now in the future, we're going to use cost curves to determine what the farmer supply is and where they should produce to maximize profit. But for right now, their choice is anywhere along the demand curve. We assume that all firms try to maximize profits, including the perfectly competitive firms. So recall from the past chapters that profit equals the total revenue minus the total cost. Revenue for a perfectly competitive firm is easy. The firm receives the same amount of money for every unit of output it sells. So the price is going to equal the average revenue, and that will equal the marginal revenue. So the average revenue is the total revenue divided by the quantity of the product sold. The marginal revenue is the change in the total revenue from selling one more unit of a product. We're going to illustrate this example in a table for an individual farmer, Farmer Parker, on the next slide. In this example, Farmer Parker is a wheat farmer. So let's look at their revenue schedule. So the first column shows the number of bushels of wheat, the quantity of product they're producing. The next shows the market price per bushel. The third column is the total revenue, so it's a sum of all the revenue that they've gained from however many units they sell. The fourth column is the average revenue, so the average amount of money they're making for all the goods, or the total revenue divided by the total number of bushels they sold. And the fifth column is the marginal revenue, or the revenue from the next unit, from the additional unit of wheat they sold. So for a firm in a perfectly competitive market, the price is equal to both the average revenue and the marginal revenue. So price equals total revenue divided by quantity, and price equals the change in total revenue divided by the change in total quantity. So we can see let's say as Farmer Parker moves from 7 bushels of wheat to 8 bushels of wheat, the market price per bushel is going to stay the same at $7. So the total revenue is going to increase from 49 at 7 bushels of wheat to 56 at 8 bushels of wheat. So that's literally just 7 bushels times the market price of $7, and 8 bushels times the market price of $7. The average revenue, because the average revenue is literally the total revenue divided by the quantity sold, so that's going to be 7 for both of them. And then the marginal revenue, or the difference between the total revenue for 8 bushels and the total revenue for 7 bushels, will be 56 bushels minus 49 bushels, or 7 bushels of wheat. To determine our alfalfa farmer's profit, we need to consider more than just revenue. We also need to consider cost. So in column 1 in the figure on the slide, we have the quantity produced. In column 2, we have the total revenue. In column 3, the total cost. And in column 4, we have the profit, or the total revenue minus the total cost. So now, if the farmer produces 0 bushels of wheat, there's going to be 0 revenue because they're not selling anything. However, the total cost is still going to be $10 because remember, there is still a fixed cost of owning the farm, owning the equipment, all that stuff. That isn't dependent on how many units they produce. So if the farmer produces 0 bushels of wheat, the profit is going to be negative $10, or the $0 in revenue minus the $10 in cost. Let's look at another quantity. So say when there's 2 bushels of wheat being sold. In this case, the total revenue is $14. They're getting $7 per bushel of wheat. And the total cost is going to be $16.50. The profit in this case, the total revenue minus the total cost, is going to be $14 minus $16.50, or negative $2.50. So in this case, the farmer is still going to be operating at a loss. So now let's consider another level of quantity that the farmer is producing. So at 7 bushels of wheat, the total revenue is going to be $49. The total cost is going to be $35.50. So the total revenue minus the total cost, the firm, or in this case the farmer, ends up with a $13.50 profit. And in this case, if we look at the profit column, that's going to be the greatest profit that the farmer is going to receive, or based on the quantity. Farmer Brown's profit is going to decline to $11.50. That there is a profit maximizing level of output, that at a certain level, the firm, or in this case the farmer, will have the greatest profit, and if you go below that or above that, there will be less profit. We can also use the marginal revenue and the marginal cost to determine where to produce. If the profit is maximized or marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost, or when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. In this case, at 7 units, the marginal revenue equals $7, and the marginal cost equals $6.50. In this case, when the marginal cost is $9, it's higher than the marginal revenue. So the rational farmer, not wanting to lose money, is not going to produce at that quantity because of that additional cost of producing another unit. When working with marginal revenue and marginal cost to determine the optimal level of production, it's generally easier to determine this level of output by using a graph of marginal revenue, marginal cost, instead of by looking at a table. So the marginal revenue is going to be constant and equal to the price for the perfectly competitive firm. Remember, it's always going to be at $7, however many bushels they sell. So in that case, the marginal revenue is going to be horizontal at $7. So the firm, or in this case the farmer, is going to maximize profit by choosing a level of output where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, or slightly less than the marginal cost if the curves don't cross equally at quantities. Let me see here. So in this example, the marginal revenue and marginal cost curves cross right at about 7 units. So the profit maximizing level of output, where marginal revenue is equal or as close as possible to marginal cost, is going to be at 7 units. So how could this process occur in real life? Remember, decisions are made on the margin. So our farmer in this example will consider planting and harvesting additional crops, so an additional bushel, instead of trying to determine the size ex ante. So if the cost of labor to cultivate his alfalfa is higher than the revenue he's going to receive from selling it, the farmer will choose not to cultivate it, or not to plant it initially. They're thinking on the margin, they're thinking of the next unit. So now, what are the rules for profit maximization? The rules that we've just developed for profit maximization are, first off, the profit maximizing level of output is where the difference between the total revenue and total cost is the greatest. That's what we learned from the first slide detailing this. The second rule is a profit maximizing level of output is where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. That came to us from the third slide, or the third different way of looking at the profit maximizing level of output. However, neither of these rules require the assumption of perfect competition. These rules are going to be true for every single firm and every single type of market we're going to look at after this. For perfectly competitive firms, we can develop an additional rule, because for those firms, the price equals the marginal revenue. So this implies that the profit maximizing level of output is also where the price equals the marginal cost. In this section, we're going to use a graph to illustrate the profit and loss function for a perfectly competitive firm. We know the profit equals the total revenue minus the total cost, and the total revenue equals the price times the quantity. So we can write that profit equals the price times the quantity minus the total cost. So if we divide both sides by Q, we will get the profit divided by Q equals the price minus the average total cost. And then if we multiply by both sides by Q again, we end up with profit equals the price minus the average total cost times the quantity. The right-hand side is the area of a rectangle, the height of P minus average total cost, and the length of Q. Now we can use this to illustrate the profit on a graph and estimate what the profit level is of a perfectly competitive firm. A firm maximizes the profit at the level of output in which the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. The difference between the price and the average total cost is going to equal the profit per unit of output. So the total profit equals the profit per unit of output times the amount of output. So that's going to be the area of the green rectangle on the graph. So, because firms produce at the profit maximizing level of output, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, that's going to be where the red marginal cost curve intersects with the blue marginal revenue curve. So that's the Q at which a perfectly competitive firm is going to produce. Now the profit, as we said, is the marginal revenue minus the average total cost, or the price minus the average total cost, because price and marginal revenue are going to be the same for a perfectly competitive firm. So the difference there, the per unit profit, is going to be the difference between the market price and the average total cost. To get the total profit overall, you're going to want to get the area of that green rectangle. So it's going to be the number of units sold, that are Q, times the profit per unit of output, or the price minus the average total cost. Now there's a common error for a lot of students that are first learning this that think that profit is maximized at Q1. In this case, the example on the right in the figure where average total cost and marginal cost intersect. This maximizes the profit per unit, but not the total profit. The next few units bring in more marginal revenue than their marginal cost, so they're going to end up increasing the profit. So the profit maximizing level of output, remember, is where the marginal cost curve intersects the marginal revenue curve. We know that we should produce at the level of output where the marginal cost equals the marginal revenue. We've been calling this the profit maximizing level of output. But this isn't always the case. What if the firm doesn't make a profit at this level, or at any other level? In this case, we would want to make the smallest loss possible. Note that sometimes loss may be unavoidable if we have high fixed costs. It turns out, even in this situation, that marginal cost equaling marginal revenue is still the correct rule to use. This will guide us to the loss minimizing level of output. In the figure on the right, the price never exceeds the average cost, so the firm cannot possibly make a profit. The best thing a firm can do in this case is to break even, because where the marginal cost curve crosses the marginal revenue curve, the average total cost curve also crosses at that point. So there is no difference between the price and the average total cost, so we'll have zero profit. Still, if we produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, that leads us to the optimal level of output, even in this situation. At any other level, you're going to have a greater loss instead of having zero loss. A firm breaking even is less than ideal, but a firm experiencing a loss is even worse. So the situation for this firm, in the figure on the right, is not only can it not make a profit, but the price is always lower than the average total cost. So no matter where it produces, it's going to produce at a loss. So the goal for this firm is to make the smallest loss possible by again following the marginal cost equals marginal revenue rule. No other level of output allows a firm's loss to be so small. And the firm's loss is calculated just how we calculate the firm's profit. It will be the price minus the average total cost for the per unit loss, and then for the total loss, it will be the quantity times the price minus the average total cost. Once we've determined the quantity where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, we can immediately know whether the firm is making a profit, breaking even, or making a loss. So, a simple way to remember this is at that quantity, if the price is greater than the average total cost, the firm is going to be making a profit. If the price is equal to the average total cost, the firm will be breaking even. And if the price is less than the average total cost, the firm is making a loss. Now what's even better about this is that these statements hold true at every level of output.